funny angles and funny light. All right, here I am. Back again. Welcome. It is Monday. Goddamn. Monday, the 13th of June, 2022, and this is the SitRep, the situation report. What the F is going on in the world? Let's have a chat about it, try and figure it out ourselves. What's going on with my thing? With my thingy thing. There we go. All right. So I am on the Instagrams and the YouTubes this morning, and I'm working hard to try and maybe even get this onto Spotify so you can listen to this, listen to the smooth, dulcet tones of my voice whilst traveling in your car if you wish. What do we do here? We go through different stories that have piqued my interest over the past 24 hours in the perspective of a prepper, somebody who prepares themselves for emergencies and or disasters, or as I like to call them, a sane, rational human being. So the goal here is for us to try and look at these stories and go, how can we better prepare ourselves for the future, especially from probably more of the perspective of an Australian, maybe even a New Zealander. But, you know, it's applicable to all, I believe. And yeah, the result, I guess, we're trying to get here is that we all become self-reliant human beings. And no matter what is thrown at us in the future, we do okay. A lot of kind of really strategic level stuff this morning. There's not too much I'm going to talk about. There was a number of stories that were kind of like in the weeds, but it's sort of more like food doom and gloom sort of stuff. So I'm just going to leave that alone a little bit today. There'll be a little bit on it, but I'm going to leave it alone for the main part and talk more about what's happening in the world, what's happening in certain theaters of the world that we're seeing shape up. First off, though, we're going to talk about this little story that got sent to me, which is from Texas. Nothing's bigger than it is in Texas. What are we talking about? A liquid natural gas plant. A liquid natural gas plant, and if you recall, the situation in Europe at the moment is such that they are not getting natural gas from Russia, although some countries are, but a lot of them have banned getting gas from Russia. They're hurting because of it. The US has said, don't worry about it. Got your back, Europe. We're going to send over liquid natural gas to you pronto. So anyway, liquid natural gas plant about 70 miles south of Houston on an island has blown up. It's handy, isn't it? In the midst of an energy crisis, mystery explosion in Texas takes one of the world's largest fuel plants offline. Fantastic. Sure, that won't have an effect on fuel supplies or prices at all, he says sarcastically, as obviously this is going to have a big effect on all those things, and yet another reason why the people of Europe are probably going to suffer more. Good thing it's summer there right now. Although there was another story, and I didn't grab this one, but it was from Russia, in one of the provinces in Russia that is, they're obviously in summer as well, and it's currently bucketing down with snow. They had 25 degrees, that's Celsius, 25 degrees a couple of days ago, and now it's snowing there. So, all right, here's a little food one from the US. US Foods Union. So US Foods is like a food distribution company. Their union has come out and said that they're possibly going to go on strike, putting the food service giant on notice that work stoppages are imminent. This means that unresolved work contract negotiations between the labor union and the food service distributor could result in a strike that may disrupt the flow of food products to tens of thousands of restaurants. More of a reason to grow your own food and to cook your own food as well is the other part of it. I think one of the big things for me as a very young man, leaving home, joining the military, and then living off base out in the real world, I ate out a lot. I just got takeaway the majority of the time, and then all of a sudden started cooking a few years into it. And I think that was one of the big key points that changed my life. It really made me think about nutrition, about what I was eating. It made me think about the cost of food. It made me think about how to prepare food, and it really changed my health, I would say, more than almost anything else. Cooking my own food. So it's, again, I'm always talking about storing your own food, growing your own food, but cooking your own food is a huge thing as well. Cooking and storing your own food and knowing how to prepare food for the future. Because this kind of stuff can happen. If you're somebody who is relatively dependent on eating in restaurants, and all of a sudden the restaurants aren't getting in food, then you're going to struggle. All right, let's start jumping around the world now. Let's go into the Middle East. Israel and Saudi Arabia could be moving towards closer ties as a 2-year anniversary of the Abraham Accords approaches. So Saudi Arabia, is neither here nor there, but generally seen as a pro-West country, strong ties to the US. Israel, also in that sort of camp. And so, again, what we're seeing fall out now or start to take shape in the Middle East is the division of the countries, which is basically along the lines that we always kind of assumed it would be, with a few other countries in there that we're like, where are they going to go? And a few countries having their own issues and problems that they need to deal with. So what we're seeing here is these alliances maybe becoming more stronger as the threat level increases. So is there the imminent looming threats that are kind of building in this area and all areas of the world at the moment is causing alliances to come about. That's the way I am reading this. So primarily Israel and Iran are going head to head. And so Israel will be wanting to firm up alliances within its area. And this is certainly one of them. Let's talk about Iran now. Iran is closer than ever to a nuclear weapon, and Biden has run out of options. Long-running tensions over Iran's nuclear capabilities may have reached a point of no return this week, thrusting the Middle East into uncharted waters. As I was talking about a few days ago, Iran turned off all the cameras for its nuclear facilities, so the nuclear watchdogs couldn't see what they were up to anymore. Their promise being that they were not going to develop any nuclear weapons, and they were using their nuclear facilities for power generation only. Now they can do what they want. So potentially they are refining more uranium in order to build nuclear weapons. That's a possibility that's happening. If you think what Iran wants to do in the future and what sort of overtures they've been making towards Israel in particular, but their area and their anti-Western sentiment, it would seem plausible, at the very least, bordering on probable, I would say, in my summation, bordering on probable that they would be developing nuclear weapons right now. In the face of the kind of world treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Act, which obviously doesn't lead to a good place. Does Israel have nuclear weapons? Well, officially no, but everyone kind of assumes that they do, and I would probably hazard a guess that they do. Let's talk about nukes in China now. Nukes in China. So China's come out and done a bit of a parade for China's 70th anniversary National Day military parade. They've basically come out, the defense minister, and says, look at all the nukes we have. Look at these nukes. And there was no solid numbers or anything that was talked about that was released, anything solid here, but they basically said that we're developing our nuclear weapons, our new nuclear weapons, I think was the exact wording that they used, developing the new nuclear weapons. What are they saying here? They're possibly saying that they are building up their stockpile and that they're modernizing their nuclear capabilities with what, who knows, hypersonic missiles, who knows what they're doing, but that's probably what they're doing. Now, with this as well, they've also released that they are standing by this agreement that they have, or a policy that they have, that they will never strike first. They will never strike first. So, all this kind of makes sense. They're saying, look at how good our nuclear capability is, and it's growing. Keep this in mind that official numbers, China has about 10% of what maybe the US has, or somewhere 10 to 15% of the nuclear weapons that the US has. However, they may be quite more modern and ready to act than the US nuclear arsenal. I don't know. I don't live in that world, so I don't actually know what they have. But it's possible. It is possible that they have that. Now, they're also coming out and saying that they're never going to strike first. It is purely a defensive mechanism, a retaliatory mechanism that they have. And that they, I think, quote here, which means the weapons are being developed to safeguard national peace and avoid the catastrophe of nuclear war. And there's always this circular argument about this, developing nuclear weapons in order to avoid nuclear war. It doesn't actually make sense at the end of the day. But that's what they're doing. I think more than anything, what they're doing here is coming out and saying, by releasing this information, is again them sort of waggering their collective penis size in the world's face, saying, we are ready to play. If you want to play this game, US, we're ready to play. And I've said this a million times before, but I'll say it again. I am in full belief that we are in a state of de facto war with China at the moment. A Cold War, yes, but it is a war that is outside the scope of what we usually think. So we traditionally think war is what's going on in Ukraine right now. Or we kind of developed that idea in the 70s, 80s, where we had this Cold War happening, where we now thought it was something else. It was maneuvering and jockeying around as well, getting ready for that thing to happen. However, the modern era, this is not it. We've come into another level, and I've talked about these levels before, these different tiers of warfare, or generations of warfare. And so what we see now is a new generation of warfare where we are actually conducting warlike activity in a space that is non-physical. So what I'm just trying to say here is that countries are manipulating other countries by releasing media information, by accessing open source information on the internet, and then putting out psyops, or psychological operations, through means like the internet. And other media like news, TV, shows, movies, all this sort of stuff. That is one of the battle spaces that we sorely are blind to in the West right now. And that is one of the battle spaces that Russia and China in particular utilize very well. But it's this sort of information. This is a very circuitous route to get to my point here. I apologize, but what I'm saying here is, why is China putting out this information? Because they're playing war games in a space that we don't quite think. So we could read this on its face value and go like, oh, China's coming out and saying, hey, we've got machines of war here. We have nuclear capability. Good for us. But what they're actually doing is a more subtle effect on a wider space. Again, I will recommend a couple of books if you want to go further into this. Start with The Shadow War by Jim Shooter, The Shadow War, and then move up to Unrestricted Warfare. Unrestricted Warfare was actually a paper penned by two Chinese generals, and it was about exactly what I just explained there. That warfare is no longer restricted to the battle space, shooting water pistols at each other. That's not what it's about anymore. I mean, it is about that, but it's about so many other things as well. Again, I thought I was just going to jump on, read out a couple of stories, and not do any rants today. I always surprise myself. All right. What else is happening in China? If you haven't heard the reports yet, they were easing their restrictions. Things look good. And then they just chucked on another restriction, said, hey, we've had another possible outbreak. Or they didn't actually use the word outbreak. It was very clever what they did. They never used the word outbreak. They just said, we have to do mass testing right now, lockdown. which I thought was interesting. Oh, you're just doing mass testing. Okay, it's not like you just found another breakout of this disease that you have no hope, no chance in stopping, but you are doing everything you can to try and stop it. So panic buying in Shanghai as mass COVID-19 testing reports trigger fears of a new lockdown. So they've come out and they've said, right, everyone has to test, mass testing. People have freaked out, understandably so. If you've just been punished for weeks and weeks on end in a lockdown where it has caused extreme hardship to individuals and you haven't been able to access things like supermarkets, then if you're going through the same, if they start playing the same music, the same musical chairs music, you're thinking like, oh, fuck, this is about to go down again. And so they've all rushed en masse into the shops, panic buying, stripped the shelves apparently over there. How does this affect you and I sitting here in Australia? Well, this is basic human psychology in play. It is manifest human fear. This is not something that we should look at. This is not one of those occasions where you should look at and go like, oh, that's somewhere else in the world. This is something that you should look at right now and go, this could happen in my city, in my suburb, in my town. This could happen. It is a very, very real possibility that could happen to you. So learn the lessons now. Look at what's happening in China. Take those lessons on and prepare for this. Be the kind of person, as I say, always imagine that, bang, your door has just been locked and you cannot leave that door for 3 days, for 3 weeks, for 3 months. Do you have what you need in your own house to survive? That's what I want you to think about. That's one part of preparation. Because then you don't have to deal with this. You don't have to freak out. You don't have to go to the supermarket. You don't have to fight other people for toilet paper or for cans of beans. And you don't have to get there and find stripped shelves and go, shit, I don't know how to feed my family tonight. All right, let's move over to Russia. The head of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Narashinskin, I don't know, Narashinskin, Sergei, has come out and said, look, there can be no stable peace without Russia. All right, that it just can't happen. It has never happened in the world. We are key. We are absolute key. Russia is a traditional, quote, Russia is a traditional guarantor of international peace and security. No peace, neither global nor regional, can be solid, stable, or lasting without Russia. Is that true or not? I don't know. Again, this is another thing where, and this is directly from Russian propaganda, in case you couldn't tell, this is another thing where we go, okay, this is what they're saying. Now, why are they saying that? What are they actually trying to say here? It might be true. It might be true, but it might be true in the sense that without Russia on side, like Russia is either a friend or they are an enemy. There is no neutrality. There is no middle ground here. They're either on the side, and if they're not on the side, then they are a detriment to world peace because they're the ones who are probably fucking it up. So, that's quite interesting. Here's another quote though that I find quite interesting, because this is it's propaganda, and I want you to think about propaganda and lies and things like that work best when there's some amount of truth, and they work really well when there's a lot of truth in them and they just twist it a little bit at the end. So I want you to think about how true this next little piece of propaganda from Sergei might be. The attempts of the liberal totalitarian regimes in the West to sanction and cancel Russia only demonstrate their obsession with being the center of the world and making other nations bend to their will. Is the West trying to make other nations bend to its will? Maybe. Better us than them might be the policy. And liberal totalitarian regimes. That one for me, I was like, ugh, I can't really argue that right now. I really can't argue that point. It might be an extreme end of it. It might be a characterization of the West. Certainly not everyone is in that camp. But if you look at a lot of the leaders, a lot of the parties at the moment, and a lot of the things that are coming out, a lot of things that are important to people, to the masses, then yeah, he might be kind of right here. Apologies about that. It was my brother trying to call me while I'm doing a SitRep. He should be watching this, not calling me. So also from Russian propaganda, we're seeing them doing a report from the Sunday Times. They picked this up from the Sunday Times, from Henry Kissinger, or a interview with Henry Kissinger, who was a former US Secretary of State, who basically came out and said the West should take Moscow's interests into account. The West should be very concerned about what happens with Russia. The exact words were that Russia might turn into an outpost of China in Europe. So essentially what Kissinger is saying, and what he's concerned about, that is, if Russia actually sort of collapses, it's China who's going to come in and take that hold. And then China now has a big arm and influence right into Europe. And that's scaring him for some reason. I couldn't imagine why. In an interview with the Sunday Times, Kissinger hailed NATO's united response. NATO's united response to Russia's military offensive in Ukraine, and said the alliance should be maintained as it has grown into an institution reflecting European and American collaboration in an almost unique way. That's the idea, I guess, of NATO, and it kind of is, but again, I don't believe it's as united as Mr. Kissinger would have us believe. And I'm going to skip to a story here, which is about NATO. NATO must confront Turkey's humanitarian rights abuses. So I've talked about this quite a bit. I've always found Turkey an interesting part of NATO. I've never seen Turkey as fully, integrated into this European ideal. And I've also seen Turkey as a little bit dictatorship, a little bit off the rails economically, and a little bit troubling when it comes to humanitarian issues would be a polite way of putting it. I would say bordering on genocidal. But that's from my perspective as somebody who has spent a little bit of time with Kurdish people in northern Syria. You can see what the effect is there, that Turkey clearly has an agenda to crush the Kurdish people, as does the other part of Syria, as does the southern part of Iraq, as does probably part of Iran. The Kurdish people don't have their own official land, their own official country, and all these other countries that have the Kurdish people within them, in what we possibly should call Kurdistan, want to crush them and sweep that under the rug and go forget them. Anyway, Turkey's part of that. NATO, obviously, Turkey is a partner country of NATO, and to have that within their own ranks, I think that's something that NATO probably has to look at, and that's what this article here is looking at. On top of this, and I did kind of allude to this right at the start when we're talking about Sweden and Finland coming into NATO, and Turkey instantly put their hands up and said, no, they can't come in because they're paying those terrorist Kurdish people. They're giving them money. So if they stop giving them money, we'll allow Sweden and Finland to come into NATO. And instantly when I saw that, I was like, here's a problem. NATO is not as allied as we think it is. There's a problem. All the Western NATO countries would be looking at this, I imagine, and would be going, this is a fucking problem. What are we going to do about this? We really want Finland in our alliance. We kind of need Turkey in our alliance for that southern border there. What are we going to do? Well, I can see this coming to more and more of a head. This is going to be a problem. NATO is going to have to really think about this. The lines are going to be drawn. Do they want Finland in, or do they want Turkey? That's where I see this going to, and one might have to be booted for the other's sake. So Mr. Kissinger, who's talking about this beautiful united NATO front that is perfect and works great. Again, I like to not look so much at what people say, but what they do. So if we look at what NATO says it does, yeah, Mr. Kissinger, it's all rainbows and unicorn farts for sure. But if we look at what is actually happening within that alliance, not so much. All right. Couple little shortages, global chip shortage. We're talking about microchips, not potato chips, not fish and chops. We're talking about these computer chips. The shortage, which has already happened, which has been happening for quite some time, and is getting worse. Well, it's expected to worsen. And why is it expected to worsen? It's because exports out of Russia. There are certain gases, and I think off memory, I didn't actually check this morning, but off memory, it's like rayon gas or some sort of weird gas that I can't remember. I'm not into my elemental table or that sort of side of science, but there's some sort of gas that gets exported almost exclusively out of Russia. Obviously, there's a ban on that now. They're saying, no, that can't come out. So the semiconductor producers are going, well, without this gas, we cannot produce semiconductors. We cannot build these chips. It just cannot happen. So another smack in the face from sanctions. And of course, like, if you think semiconductors aren't a big deal, then I don't know what planet you're living on. They're a big deal. They're a big deal to everything in our world right now. And let's talk about unintended consequences, again, not specifically from sanctions, but from tariffs. So Biden has come out and he said, yep, we're going to just build everything green and everything's going to be great. So all the solar panels, and I've talked about this in the past before, because solar panels, one of the main constituent products required for solar panels to work is silver. So, if you're thinking, me thinking in my future mindset here, investor sort of mindset, I love gold and silver, and I make I don't hide that in any way, shape or form. But, I'm thinking about, I'm looking at silver, I'm going, well, if the US is going to base its energy production off, at least in some part, solar, they're going to need a lot more solar panels, and that means they will need a lot more silver, which means the price of silver may increase. I mean, it may not, but it may increase. Anyway, who makes solar panels? Who makes them? Well, China does, of course, because they make freaking everything. So, US going into this silent, quasi de facto state of conflict with China, of Cold War conflict with China, and then come out and say, hey, we need all the solar panels we can get in the world, and China going, well, we make them. We make them. Do you want them? Because we can give them to you. You can buy them off us. And so the US going, yes, here, money, take all the money. This one I thought was interesting because if you are even a amateur historian, and I am an amateur historian, I do like looking at history and trying to learn the lessons of history. One of the interesting ones that always comes to mind when I see stuff like this is the policy of the US to try and make money by selling metals to countries pre and into World War II. Okay, so there was a bit of financial hardship going on at this point, Great Depression, as you may have heard. And one of the things that was happening was China and the US looked like they were, Japan and US were on a collision course. A lot of people were talking about it. A lot of people were saying this doesn't look good. This is going to end in conflict. But then the US came out and said, you know what, we need money, so we're going to sell metals to Japan. And Japan took those metals and essentially turned them into guns and bullets, which they then used, and bombs, which they then used to kill American soldiers. So in a way, the US enabled the war to happen and enabled the war to go as long as it did in the Pacific area, which, as we should all know, only terminated when the US then unleashed the greatest destructive force that we've ever known and forever changed the geopolitical landscape on Earth, possibly opening up an era of time where we could now wipe off all human life from the face of the Earth. So that went weird, didn't it? Story time. Essentially what they were doing was selling metals to Japan, and Japan were turning those metals into bullets and then shooting them back at the US. Short-term thinking. Again, are we seeing short-term thinking here? Is the US in their fevered rush to try and jump into the alternative energy sector actually funding and propping up what could potentially become its enemy? Also, building up an industry there. So China can also just do the same, can ride on the coattails of it and have their own solar industry in there. That's something to think about. That is the unintended consequences that I always like to try and fathom. As much as we can't think about what could happen in the unknown sphere, it's always a good idea to try and stretch our brains a little bit to get into that space. But, that's an interesting one. So that's where I want to leave you there today, thinking about the unknown unknowns, what could happen in the world and how certain policies and decisions that our leaders are making right now, apart from the obvious shitness that they're going to bring, I think is pretty obvious, but maybe some of these things require common sense, which in my experience is not so common nowadays. But some of the unintended consequences that we didn't think about, those second and third order effects. But at the end of the day, as I always like to say, it shouldn't matter too much if you've got a backyard filled with veggies, if you've got a deep freezer or two stocked with meat, and you regularly go out and hunt or you harvest and grow your own livestock. If you're interacting with your community and helping support people who are doing similar things by buying fruit and veg off local producers and, maybe even doing meat swaps with people like local hunters that you know. And certainly, if you can, getting out of the cities. But continue doing that, continue storing up your food, continue thinking about growing your own food. And as always, keep your eyes open. Keep looking out for what's happening in the world. If you've got any questions, send them through to me. I love to hear them. And until next time, my friends, Semper Paratus.